Urban sign language. We've got this on the door at Punch and everybody comments on it. So, thanks to Alan, we're having a meeting with a gentleman and he was explaining how in what he called ordinary sign language, by which I think he meant white people sign language, driving was like this. But when he was out with his friends, driving was like this. We had to get that in. Can I introduce you to Rinkoo Barpaga?
Hi everybody. Hi. So my name is Rinkoo, and this guy here is my interpreter, or my slave. His name is Cam. He's doing the voiceover. So it's great to be here, and I'm going to just talk to you about myself actually, how I sort of got involved into this project and talking about languages. When I was at school, sign language was banned. It wasn't something we were allowed to use. We were educated in spoken English, and I didn't use sign language until I was 8 years old. And I met two young black deaf people from Jamaica. This is back home in Birmingham, which is where I grew up. I'd never seen that type of sign language that they were using, and I sort of learnt it from them and became skilled in using it. From the age of 8 up until today, that's the sign language that I've used. There is a difference between British Sign Language and urban sign language. And actually, when I was younger, I got a job working for ITV as a translator. So what I did was I translated from written English into British Sign Language. That was actually my first job. I used to work as a cleaner. That's what I used to actually do before that job. So I was working away. I'd work sort of cleaning 4 or 5 different places in a day, and then somebody saw me signing and said, you know, I really like your variety of sign language. So they put me into an audition, and in the audition I was using this variety of sign language, and they were saying, that sign language looks brilliant. It looks brilliant, but it's not clear. It needs to be polished. I was thinking, what do you mean my language needs to be polished? Well, your grammar, the way you use verbs, that sort of thing. So I went down to Durham University, and at Durham I was trained to use proper British Sign Language, and I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't actually sure what that was. I thought my language was fine. We use a sign in British Sign Language called, for shame, and somebody said to me, what's the urban sign language? And that's it. And they said, no, you can't sign that. That's not how you do it. But that was the language that I learned as I grew up. And they asked me where I got it from. And I learnt it in Birmingham. And they said, well, that's not the correct language. You're going to destroy the traditional use of British Sign Language. And I couldn't understand that. Couldn't understand that idea. Anyway, eventually, when I went back home, I realised that everybody was using the variety of language that I used. And I realised that we had to record and document this urban sign language. And we took it back to Durham. And they said, you know, there's a question there. Why did we ever develop our own language vernacular? So we've spent the last 13 years researching that. British Sign Language didn't want to accept urban sign language as a variety of language. Luckily, I went and worked at MTV. And when I was at MTV, they would give me scripts that used American slang, hip-hop, that kind of language. And I realised that formal British Sign Language could never express that. It didn't have the equivalence, but Urban Sign Language did. So I started using it on screen. And you can see, I don't know if you can see on that poster over there, but there's a picture of me doing some varieties of Urban Sign Language and the differences between that and British Sign Language. So here's an example. In British Sign Language, one of the signs that we use for drunk is what I've just shown you there, drunk. But in urban sign language is that. Or it might be, someone says, are you talking about me behind my back in British Sign Language? That sole sign means that whole sentence in urban sign language. One of the funniest things that has ever happened to me was you go to an event, you know, whether it's a social event or a formal event, and you would meet somebody, maybe a girl, and you're talking to this girl, and all of my black and white friends are walking behind us and doing this. And you'd be thinking, what does that mean? It's an urban sign language. There's no way to translate that into English. People would always ask me, what does that sign mean? And I'd say, I can't, nothing. And I realised that we have our own code. Urban Sign Language has its own code that can't be translated. The interesting thing about the urban vernacular that we use is I would say that it was probably established perhaps 30 or 40 years ago. It still has links to British Sign Language. We've picked things from American Sign Language, and every country has its own formalised sign language. In Britain, of course, we have different regions. Liverpool, Manchester, London, they all have their own varieties of sign language as well. So you can see that urban sign language didn't just come about for no reason. The reason that it actually came about was that back in the 70s and 80s, ethnic minority communities who were deaf weren't integrating with white deaf people. So deaf clubs were excluding us. It wasn't until 1995 that I was allowed into a white person's deaf club. So that was how we started creating our own language. Of course, colonialism took over, and white deaf people told us that we couldn't use that variety of language because it wasn't correct. I'm sure you've seen in America, I can't remember the name of some of those people, like sort of gangsters who have their own code and they communicate with each other in order to avoid people understanding what they're saying. And that's what we do. That's what we did it for originally, that's what we still do. Urban Sign Language isn't in the mainstream at the moment. But interestingly, even though British Sign Language, the British Sign Language Police said you're never allowed to use this variety of language, and that we have to use traditional sign language in the mainstream, we are working hard at the moment to break through those barriers. And it's actually because of social media that urban sign language has become much more widespread. People are beginning to ask questions about why they don't understand the vernacular that we use. So we continue to fight, we continue to get deaf people to use urban sign language. Maybe I should teach you a few little signs. I don't know whether that would be interesting. Yes. Alright, so let me try and remember some of the things I use. So this is the sign for boring in British Sign Language. That's a nationally recognised sign. Every deaf person recognises that. Urban Sign Language is that. Relax. That's British Sign Language. Relax. Our sign is that. Walk. We say walk. Shop. That's British Sign Language. That's what we use in urban sign language. So facial expressions are extremely important in urban sign languages. And when you're talking, let's say, about a girl, that's what we sign in urban sign language. And we actually use the hips as a recognition of the person we're talking about. There's many more examples of urban sign language that we could use. I'm just thinking if there's anything else I want to say. No, I think that's it for now. So thank you. Thank you for your time and thank you for inviting me.